Just a quick overview as this is described in the program, but we're still in the part of the event that we call the business of BPM. And something that has been, by design, underrepresented in the bpmNEXT program is talking about the value-added side, the service partner side, not just implementation. And I'll go through a little bit of introductions, and I'll let these gentlemen introduce themselves in more detail. But they're not here as implementers of BPM per se, but those that are partners of BPM vendors who have built on the platform a value-added solution that they provide. And that really is, in my view, and Bruce and I talked about this, so I'd say our collective view, an important part of bpmNEXT, of where the BPM market is going, and we expect to see more and more innovation around this. Again, not just implementation, but really extending through innovation and value-added capabilities, BPM platforms. So this panel discussion is to talk about that from your perspective and their perspective, to talk to the buying community, what that means, where they see the market going, but also talking to the BPMS vendor community, what they see and what they expect as partners, and to help provide that lens for those that are in the business of BPM for what they should be doing as partners. So all three of these gentlemen are here by invitation, and I picked them based on their role in the market. Some of them are well-known mavericks. Scott has been a fixture and a provocateur in our community and the community at large. Pramod has been, who's the founder of Princeton Blue, has been a recognized leader when we get to talk about partners in the space. Pramod in Princeton Blue has the distinction of being a partner to the market leaders in the space, so not with a single vendor, but a partner to IBM, Pega, Appian. And Jonathan, who has built a solution on top of the Salesforce platform, also has many years in the general space as a solution provider and one that's built systems that complement existing platforms, but it is here in the capacity of a BPM solution that's been built on the Salesforce platform, which actually will be talked about in the Salesforce presentation. But while I've done a little bit of introduction, why don't I give you a chance to say hello and introduce yourselves?
Sure. Jonathan Saper, I'm the CEO of Silvertree Systems, and our product is Work Relay, based on the Salesforce platform, so it's 100% native Salesforce. And we kind of look at it as Salesforce provides the car, and we're the power package that kind of comes on top of that. And the product is kind of a mixture of both process and project, which is a little bit different from probably most vendors.
Scott Francis, I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders at BP3. Previously CTO for a long time, on the technical side, and a good number of us came out of the Lombardi heritage. We're part of the Lombardi software company, and Lance and I started the business a few years before Lombardi sold to IBM. So that then put us into the IBM partner ecosystem, and certainly know a lot about that. Although we've worked with some other vendors as well, and happy to do so.
Pramod Sachdeva, I'm the founder and managing director at Princeton Blue. Last 9.5 years, our world has been delivering business transformation with BPM and rules. We actually also started with Lombardi as one of our first partners. Added a couple of others in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. In fact, I worked with some friends here, Software AG Web Methods, for a number of years prior to that. And so having done this for many years, this is an interesting topic because, and it goes back to the question you brought up at the beginning, what is BPM? Is this the bigger thing, or is this a part of something that's bigger? We see a lot of areas where value can be added for customers, either by extending the platform or bolting on something else on top of it.
That's a great jumping off point to what's changing relative to how it's being bought. Clay had observed that a few years ago it may have hit the zenith. And I would say that buyers then were buying BPM because BPM was cool, not because they had a well understood business case for what BPM could do. Those days, I think, have largely gone. So what are they buying today? How are they buying?
And I must have missed that phase when BPM was cool, because it's been a good party stopper, in any social conversation. When I say, "What do you do?" BPM consulting. the music festival? No. But I think, but there was a certain momentum, at least with early adopters, right? There was a smaller, tighter-knit community, I think, that was really focused on the art of the possible with ideas like BPM, and I think it was the idea more than the technology that got those early adopters excited. The specifics of the tech were sort of an afterthought, right? It's like but the idea that I can model my business and then run it, without having to then write a bunch of code that has nothing to do with the model that I wrote originally. Any of us who, wrote great diagrams in the 90s and then watched other people write them, or the other way around, someone else wrote the diagram and we wrote the code. And then later try to convince anyone that your code does what the model or the diagram says it does. Good luck, right? Rational built a good business around that sort of problem. But I think lately, at least in our conversations, the conversations with customers are all about outcomes and not really about the ideas, the sort of highfalutin, BPM rhetoric that I was sort of raised up on at Lombardi, right, is not in the rhetoric of our customer base, right? They're talking about what are the business outcomes I can get, the return, the better customer experience, the revenue capture. It's just a different set of conversations, which I think is, generally speaking, healthy, right? A little more focused.
Yeah, so we see it more that our clients want much more than just process management, right? So they want to integrate it with data and collaboration and all these other things as part of a solution, like you said, rather than just this one kind of point solution that they're going to use. So for our clients, it's great because obviously on Salesforce they get everything, and we just kind of plop on top of that. But that's fine for them because they're looking for the complete solution.
So, back in early 2000, what was the definition of BPM? I always broke it down into 3 categories. There's a process, there's integration, and then there's user experience. In fact, it was in that order, right? That was the highest priority, was the fact that I could model a process and build an application out of it. UI was the third one. If you just fast forward 10 years, you'll see that there's a whole new interaction paradigm today, right? UI is not what it used to be. In fact, I was appalled at the type of applications we were putting into production and expecting business users to use them. It was just, but the key was process and integration. Today, when you look at UI, it's a whole lot of things. It's devices and it's tablets and so on, and pretty soon we'll have kind of stuff in the air that will be floating around. And then you look at integration. Integration meant just internal data sources, right? All your legacy applications and so on. Well, today, 90% of the data that should be in the process to make the right decisions and make that process more intelligent doesn't live within an enterprise, right? So does that mean is BPM shifting, or the solution that we build with BPM is shifting? Clearly, the overall value proposition to the client has to change.
Have you found BPMS partners have been the partner that you need in helping with that shift?
So
I'll let Pramod answer that one.
it's a great question, and we do work with 3 of them, but we have knowledge across a number of them, and everybody's taken a shift in a certain direction. Whether it's in the form of Clay referred to the low code, build once, deploy on multiple devices, right? That's an approach that one of the vendors is taking. The idea of externalizing rules and bringing in some cognitive capability in order to make decision-making and the process more intelligent, right? The idea of combining business processes along with customer interactions like CRMs and some of the cognitive capabilities around next best action and so on is what another vendor is doing. So everybody's got their way of moving this forward in multiple directions. But I think it's probably a combination of all of them is where, from a customer's perspective, they need all of that.
Yeah, I think the main issue, I think, in general for BPM software vendors is they underestimate the amount of effort and investment that goes into building a solution to go to market, right? That's not it's not a demo, right? A demo is not a solution to go to market with. And I think there's some, granted, we're talking with the sales team for a large BPM vendor, right? I mean, that's kind of their view. It's like, well, do I have enough of a demo that I can go sell that? But from a solution point of view, from a partner ecosystem point of view, I think we want to build things that we can scale and build on and really, build a lot of value for customers going into the future. And that's a major investment, right? But I think there's some disconnect in terms of, what is the gap between an engine and the pieces around it, the components around it, and a solution that gets the customer the outcome they want.
So what are you suggesting then?
Well, at some level, it's where we fit in the ecosystem, right? If software vendors want that work, right, it's out there. And some of them have big services teams and go tackle that work, and some of them don't, or have undersized services teams relative to the demand. But I think there's also opportunity to, come up with products that fill that gap. But I just think it's a non-trivial thing for someone. If you're used to building an engine or tools for developers, it's a whole different trick to build tools for customers, right? And solutions for customers. So it's an interesting dichotomy.
There was that concept some time back about crossing the chasm, the book that I guess everyone's read. And he talks about the whole product. And until you get a whole product, you don't really get a whole marketplace, you don't get a whole set of expectations, and you don't get a trend happening. So it seems to me that we're very good at selling people new engines, but we don't know how to help them plan a journey or enjoy the car, So we're sort of doing a bit of the problem, and then we're saying you build the rest and integrate it. Best of breed may cost money, or we may work out how to make it simple. But it seems to me that we're focusing on little bits and not trying to look at it from the customer's end-to-end perspective. Any comments on that?
Well, I think that's exactly right. When we go into the client, they're looking for something that brings together all the different pieces. If we went in there just with our process management solution, we're not going to come up with the solution that they need, for sure. So like, for example, we do work with the clinical research organization, so they need process. Right? Process is a very important part of it, but so is data, and so is project management. So we have to make sure that we can bring all the pieces, whether we supply it or whether we bring in pieces from other vendors. As long as they can fit into the platform easily, you can kind of create that solution for them.
I blamed Gartner and by extension Jim for pushing the whole product strategy. I guess Jeffrey Moore is who I really should have put it at the feet of. As any of you know Jeffrey Moore, though, he's somebody that really has never understood technology and actually came from the PR side of Reeves McKenna.
But is smarter than all of us.
Certainly wealthier than some of us. Question, Rita.
Gisela mentioned earlier, we are from the buyer community. And so I'm looking for some simple answers to 2 or 3 questions. So for now I see that BPM itself is becoming a world of itself. It's having its own structure, it's having its own standards as far as naming is concerned. Then it's also developing its own lingo. So I see 2 practical issues, challenges. One on the business side, another on the IT side. On business side, when you start showcasing BPM to business leaders or managers who have already experienced enterprise applications like SAP and Oracle, and they feel that they become slaves of those things, how do you train them? How do you showcase these things? How do you show the advantages of these without getting into the jargons of BPM?
Right.
So there is, on one side, challenges with the business. As IT, because we are from IT. On the IT side, what kind of things should get added into the resume of an IT? So what kind of IT resources we should start hiring? Or when I'm looking for an IT person who would be driving or leading a BPM project, what should be there in the resume of that person? And third question, this is very simple. For an organization that has not been an early adapter, what are the things we should just skip and go to the things that everyone
Those are 3 great questions. So for the benefit of the folks at home that may not have caught the question, I'll repeat each one. We'll start with the first one, which is, how do we establish a business-friendly vocabulary to sell BPM rather than getting stuck in the jargon? And have you solve that problem, or do you recognize it as a problem?
It's definitely a problem. I think that one of the ways you address it is to, set aside the jargon a bit, right? I mean, learn how to speak in the terms that the business speaks about what they're doing. Not in general terms, but like specifically if they're loan origination, learn the terms and the concepts in loan origination, make sure you understand what they're doing. Often that's already the case in the IT organization supporting that kind of group, right? But the other thing is learn to, really show them something that they care about, right? Show them something that will move them, right? And we, this experience with a oil and gas customer, when we showed the UI to the person who represented, for the purposes of that meeting, end users, right? She had a bunch of people who worked for her on her team, and she started to break down into tears because it was so much better than the system they were using, and she was already, thinking ahead to, when I show my team, they're not going to believe it, and how great an experience that would be for her, right? And to me, that kind of brought me back to, I don't know, the first IT deployment I ever did in consulting, set my expectations completely out of whack with reality for the rest of my career. But we did this demo for a sales team, a pricing and configuration tool, and we had the project manager from IT demo in front of it. They had their whole, it was about room this size, full of sales scripts for a voicemail system. And when they finished, the guy finished the demo, there was a standing ovation, right, for the experience, right? Because they just quoted a system that used to take them a week to quote, and they did it in the space of a 10-minute demo with the explanations and all that jazz. And so I think if you create a great experience, your business users will find a way to fall in love with it, right? And if you don't create a great experience, then they'll still be picking apart, the jargon and the are we focused on the right things. Sorry, long-winded answer, but I think that's the key.
I'll just add to that. So at a certain level, to build a business case, whether it's BPM, whether it's ERP or any other technology, there's some basic stuff that just needs to be there. And I'm assuming since you're part of IT, you've been doing it for other initiatives. So before the last 18 years of BPM, I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers working for what they call management consulting services practice, which was effectively rolling out SAP solutions. And those were 2 years minimum, $20 to $40 million. And I know that a business case was made at the time the purchase was done, but I can't tell you that there was a study done afterwards to know if that value was realized. So I know nobody's here from Gartner, but one of the slides that I picked up from them said BPM is the best of both worlds, custom built versus off the shelf, right? Because you're getting the benefit of being able to build something very quickly and being able to customize it to your requirements and still having it be agile so it can be maintained as you move forward. The fact that you can actually roll out a project in, I've heard some vendors say 6 weeks, but let's just be a little bit more practical than that. Let's just say to deliver some value, you're going to be at least 2.5, 3 months, right? I think that's a reasonable target. Most of the big off-the-shelf type stuff doesn't roll out in that short period of time. And you can actually show, to Scott's point, you can show some of the stuff much, much sooner than that. First sprint, 2 weeks in, you can show stuff to them, which you couldn't do in a non-BPM way. So I think there's a lot of things that you'll have in your toolbox that you can take to business to convince them with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the problem is the state of the tools, right? Some of the tools are so difficult to use, and the learning curve is so long that it doesn't lend itself very easily to getting it into the organization so that they can start getting going very, very fast. So that's something that we've seen for sure.
Your question and your comments remind me of a recent experience that I had, which is helping a large integrator who has a customer that relationship already exists, that the customer needs a fairly sizable loan origination system. And this integrator has done that in spades. They recognize that the marketplace that they had been in has changed significantly. They no longer want to be selling packaged software. So they looked to BPM as providing the solution for that, but haven't been able to get past. And then there are two fundamental issues. The first one is they were still selling it like packaged software, and the customer's biggest complaint is, well, we don't want to have to create the processes and the data models to support this, and I don't see those in this BPM system. That's, to me, sort of a non sequitur. I said, well, take the off-the-shelf one. In this particular customer's case, there's no way that their processes or their data models are going to fit what you have today. So you're going to be changing those significantly. Would you rather change a platform that's designed for changing stuff, or would you rather have one where it's assumed that you will conform to those models? How do you, and we haven't solved the sales problem yet. The customer is still anxious about BPM for that reason. So how would you solve that?
Well, I think that's the right trade-off, right? It's, do you want to customize your business to the software or the other way around, right? And you know, there are some executives, right, that would tell you, no, I'd rather actually us just adopt whatever is in the software. And I've seen that happen, and it's a sad thing to see, right? But it's like, there's a guy I saw talk once at a conference, he said it was like pouring concrete on your processes, right? Because you sort of abandon everything you know about running your business and adopt a software vendor's view of how you should run your business at a pretty detailed level, right? That's a tough thing to do. I think the more obvious answer to me, although I run a small business, so you know my concerns are a little bit different. But to me, it's I want the software to reflect the business I have and how I want it to evolve and grow, rather than the other way around.
I think, you know, for certain, I guess, processes that have become commodity processes, right? Time and expense, accounting. You know, most of us, you know, can live with what's out there. There's a lot of applications out there on the cloud that will allow you to enter time and submit expenses and do some workflow routing and manage your business on QuickBooks, for example. It's configurable enough to be able to adapt to a lot of use cases. But your secret sauce in your organizations, that's where you've got to decide, is there something off the shelf that matches, you know, maybe 90% or more of your requirements? Because if it doesn't, you're going to end up customizing the hell out of it. You're going to end up with a beast that you have to maintain and support, and likely won't be able to upgrade either. I mean, one of the things back at my PwC days, you know, we used to 25, 30 people person team to manage those SAP rollouts. You know, there was, the technology back then was called ABAP. I don't know what it's called now with SAP, but you know, we made sure that the team that was doing that, because that was the customization part, right? That team could not be more than a certain percentage of the overall team. That was one metric to make sure that this project didn't end up like I don't know how many of you heard of the Nike SAP story project, but there was, you know, so there were some nightmare stories that came out of that stuff, and so you definitely want to be making sure that you're going in the direction of either it fits, then I'm going to use off the shelf. If not, BPM is certainly a very good alternative to consider.
The third part of the question I wanted to ask.
Yeah, mine was a follow-up to Arun's question. So coming back to this view of this duality, right?
Yes.
The business view and the IT view in terms of delivering a BPM solution. I mean, we've been in several demos for different BPM solutions, and we've seen the promise of, okay, having the capability for the business to these low-coding solutions that they can, by drag and drop, design the application and the process, and then that has an impact on the IT view. So we start thinking, okay, how we can put some layer of governance, because if we deliver this to the user community, what is going to be the effect on maintainability? We'll be able to deal with it. So I would like to ask the panel of experts, what is their view on this, if they can comment on what sort of governance would they recommend. Is this also a possibility that is realistic, that we can give to the users and they can directly build the processes, modeling by themselves?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, absolutely, and tell me if I've captured it. One is the reality of low-code platforms. Can end users really develop it? And we're talking about probably business analyst end users as opposed to IT and developers. And the other is, how do you enforce governance over that? How do you put controls in place, guardrails for them to do their right job? probably the short answer to the second part is that end users can't build systems. That's, I think, another matter for debate. There is a notable absence of design time governance in most of these environments, though. So it's an observation with the question, is low-code, user-oriented development a reality, and what is the governance mechanism in place to support that?
I think absolutely. I disagree a little bit. I think that end users can develop a lot of things depending on the tool. But in our experience, using, in our case, Salesforce, which is a low-code platform that has both sides. It has low-code, it has end user tools, and it has development tools. So it has all the different pieces. It's definitely possible to have everybody involved in building solutions at their particular level. No question about that. And some of the things that, in terms of governance, for example, when it comes to data, the database controls are at the database level. So if you don't have access to data, you as an end user, you can't mess anything up because you don't have access to the data. So there are a lot of things, especially in Salesforce, where they've tried to deal with that because their whole push is towards end users doing as much of the work as possible and leaving IT to do just the complex things. So I think to me, that's the future.
Yeah, I think that for all of these tools, there's an element of, depending on your community of business users, right, how much they want or can be involved. And I think the biggest issue for the low code or zero code kind of approaches to the space is the average business person doesn't want to define their own process. They don't want to do the modeling. They don't want to do that work, that detailed level work.
Because it's too hard usually.
Well, and that's part of it, right? But also, like IFTT is super easy, right? If this, then that, super easy to use. But how many people do you know who aren't technical who use it, right? Not very many, right? And there's a lot of cool stuff you can do in Salesforce. It's not that hard, but
right.
How many sales reps take advantage of it? Right?
Well,
So
not sales reps, right? Yeah, definitely not sales reps. Yeah.
But they're involved in a pretty important process for the organization.
Yeah.
So they're representative of the kinds of users you have in your other processes. And I think so that's always been more of the challenge, is the cultural challenge of you have to find the subset of users that want to be engaged and part of that process and leverage those folks. And they'll be willing to make some investment in their own education, their own self-improvement, and help you along the way. And what we've seen with BPM and also with ODM, which is the rules platform in the IBM ecosystem, is that we've been able to set it up such that users can produce these things, right? And then they go through a governance process with IT. But for rules in particular, I think you've got to be able to publish rules to production without going through a normal, QA IT process that takes, that are generally set up to take months, right? And you want to be able to react faster to the real world. So anyway, but there's some setup and work involved in getting those systems set up and make sure all the stakeholders buy into the constraints.
So I think the input is certainly valuable from the end users. We have certainly not come across clients where end users actually build it. But without the input, you'd end up with something that they're not going to use or adopt. But having said that, business analysts, if that's what we're talking about, regardless of which side of the fence they sit on, generally have some idea of both sides. They kind of know what the business needs to run, and they kind of know what IT has been able to deliver in the past. And so they will guide a little bit of, what is the best requirement to put forth that can be implemented and so on. But there'll be some back and forth. There'll be some
Key is that you want them to have an ability to define what they want with good fidelity, right?
Right.
And
right.
If that definition is good enough to run, that's great, right? And it may be the case with a rule, I can define it and run it. And with the UI, I might be able to define what it looks like, but I don't really want to do all the plumbing behind the UI, right? And so there's interesting tools out there, and I think he was referencing some of those that let you define with better fidelity what you want. And as a business analyst, right, that's hugely valuable.
So one data point just to add to that, we do BPM. Why? Because we believe that it's going to give us agility, right? It's going to allow us to change as the business needs change much, much faster. When we look at organizations that have rolled out solutions on BPM, we find that maybe it's 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 changes that come through are really not changes to the process. They're really changes in the decisions made within the process. And if you follow an approach of externalizing those decisions into a rules engine, and we've actually built some ourselves to augment certain BPM platforms as well, what that does now is to give that put that in the hands of the end users, because that they can handle. They can certainly handle the decisions a lot better than they can handle the process. I think the culture is also really important. Scott touched on that. I mean, for someone to define the overall end-to-end process, somebody's taking ownership of that. And often this process goes across silos, across many different departments, and there are some political and cultural ramifications of that.
I think you hit the nail on the head, though. You want to expose only certain parts of the system to the end user, right? You're not asking them to build the entire system. So like in our case, we give them the ability to, build your own forms or, change the way that the process, runs in certain instances. Those kinds of things. It's not a question of saying, okay, here's a low-code platform, users go off and do your thing. It's not like that.
Right, because changing user experience, the end user is not going to be able to do that. Integrating to another system, they're not, or calling a web service outside, they're not going to be able to do that. But certainly, if I have a rule, let's say a credit decision is to be made before the loan process continues, yeah, they can change the criteria for that loan and move forward, right?
So there's an earlier question you asked about, how do I find the right people, right?
Yeah,
Skills and that sort of thing. And this ties into, the reason I bring it up is it ties into culture. I think that, I could give you a list of technical skills that you could look for. They're not all required, right? There's a list of like 20 things I could give you that I would say are interesting but not required, right? And there's no one of them that you'd have to say, this is the one everybody has to know. I think the key thing is to find someone who's intellectually curious and cares about your business, right, and business in general, but loves to write code. And if they have those three things, then they'll figure out all the tooling they need, right, and they'll figure that stuff out. They'll be passionate about it because they'll care about having an impact on your business, right? And I think that's what we look for. And I realize that's kind of hard to give someone the checklist.
So when you say loves to write code,
Mm-hmm.
is there any particular language, etc., that you should say that you must know?
Yeah,
a business analyst must know Java.
Yeah, a business analyst, I wouldn't say any particular language. If you're looking for an IT person you're hiring, right, that's more on the technical side. I'm a little bit old school. I think if you can learn a language, you can learn another language. It's not like speaking. I can't seem to manage in a second language, but but I think in terms of coding, we can all be polyglots.
Yeah. I would just add to that in my own experience, and I run into this conundrum quite a bit with customers where they are trying to hire, and inevitably they are looking just for the skill set in that particular platform. They've made a decision to go with Appian or with IBM or another. They say, well, we've got to hire people with that experience. There's wisdom in that to some degree. That's part of the problem is these things should be made simpler so that you're not looking for that. But you're not necessarily finding the right set of skills simply by virtue of having worked with that environment before. And in many cases, if they're on the market and they have that experience, they're probably not the right candidate either, which is the other challenges.
Right, that's right.
That's a fair point. I mean, we've all probably worked with someone who has a lot of BPM platform experience who just actually doesn't get it, right?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
you get frustrated. But.
Your question?
Just one thing about the rules. So it's very true what you said, that the rules are changing more often than the processes, and so it's very good to transfer it more on the front user. The real problem we have usually with that is who's the owner of the rule, because they are very transversal.
Yeah.
So
Let me repeat the question if you want to add on to it. This may be our last question just as we're approaching lunch, but that is a really great point. And I will preface it that if you were to simply engage an uninitiated business analyst and ask them to define the process, what you would see is everything in two dimensions with all sorts of confusion between what is the actual flow and what are all the rules. That inevitably they will try to jam all the decision points in there rather than understanding how to abstract decisions from process flow, which will be a theme for the next few days. Those rules can be owned separately. To your question about governance, that is something that has to be set up. That doesn't just happen. But relative to the ownership of the rules, who owns the rules, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of the integration points are owned by IT. A lot of the process is owned by other well-defined stakeholders and changes very little. It's the rules that will change. Who owns them and how do you manage that?
So I think this maybe touches on a broader topic. You know, when we did SAP back then, it was a big enough initiative. Those were business. The reason why it took a long time, those were business transforming initiatives. We actually had a change management team within that, because that team's goal was to understand how are the end users affected as a result of this business transformation that's happening, right? But when you have a $30 million tag, it's got visibility and sponsorship from the top levels. Now, when you're doing you know, a 2-3 month initiative, often that's left out. It simply turns into, well, I'm just rolling out an application on this BPM platform. And that's unfortunate because though that change management is, you know, is going to define who sponsors it. That is a big part of how successful your initiative will be. Who's going to own it, who contributes to defining them, and who's going to maintain them going forward. So a lot of that ties into that non-technical stuff, the cultural and the change aspect of such an initiative. Because you are doing it, it's just technology has moved to the point where you can do it faster, cheaper, but that doesn't mean that change management is not needed. So to answer that question specifically, obviously depends on the use case, but having that change management key part of such an initiative.
Yeah, I think that I don't know that there's one right answer to who should be the owner, but it has to be defined and agreed on, and that's sort of the cultural and organizational know-how that I think, you know, if I can generally speak, I think partners like us would try to bring to the table for a customer, right, to help them understand that this really is a decision that has to be made, right, and you have to get behind it, and IT has to get behind it if the owner isn't an IT person, if it's a business person, right, they have to help make that reality. And I think in places where those parties buy into it, it works really well. But it does take some work, both interpersonally as well as from a systems perspective.
Nothing to add to that.
Great. Well, we're right on the top of the hour. If my watch is right. Does everybody else have that? Yep. My watch says it's 4 o'clock, which can't be right. But, so given that, closing thoughts?
Just going back to what we were talking about before, the whole low-code thing, I think one of the things that we lose track of is that, you know, looking across the room here, we're all kind of a little older than the millennials, let's say, right? And the millennials have in my experience anyway, have a very different view of, you know, do they get involved in the code or, you know, take control of their solutions? And the answer is yes, they do. They want to. And if you don't give them the opportunity to do that, they're going to go off and do it themselves using some other tools or whatever. So you want to be able to give them an environment in which they can, in fact, take control of some of the things that that they're working on, that they can improve, that they can, you know, move forward, basically.
Yeah, I think that, you know, people said the same thing about my generation when we were coming out of college, and I think it's true until you're too busy, right? Then your priorities, like, I just need to close this deal, right? I don't want to write the process, and so other life priorities intervene with learning how to code up a different system or learning how to model it in a different system. But I think, you know, to your general point, those tools are really valuable, right? So yeah. That's not to diminish the value.
I think it's a combination of getting the tools better and the willingness to do it, right? Those two things together.
Yeah, if you read my blog, I'm an anti age classification person, right? So I don't buy into the like generations being different. I think ages are different, right? But I've never bought into the generations being that different argument, because I remember when my generation was lazy, and then I remember when millennials were lazy. You know, Generation Y will be lazy. You know, the next generation will be lazy. It's just kind of how it works. Yeah, right. It's not right. They could all be true, right? But I also think, you know, for BPM, I think for us, you know, I think the market opportunity and the business has never been more interesting, right? And I know there are a lot of folks who will opine that BPM is dead or BPM is awesome, either end of that spectrum. And I just think, you know, if it's working for you, then go with it. And I think there's a lot of value to be created. You have lots of different options. I think that getting hung up on the term, is it BPM or not? Well, you have a business, you have processes, and you need to kind of manage your business. So you can decide whether that's BPM or not, right? But if it has value, maybe you should invest in figuring out how to make it better.
So, you know, we've been implementing a lot of BPM solutions pretty much in the same way for the last 15, 20 years. But what we're seeing possible going forward is the vast data sets that are available outside the enterprise, right? And there's a lot of intelligence in that. It's just a matter of harvesting it and bringing it into the process.
And actually having access to it.
Yeah, so access and mining it, and back when I was a master's student, my research was artificial intelligence. That was about 30 years ago, and then we didn't hear much about it. Well, there were some pockets and stuff going on, but we're seeing a resurgence of that, in the form of Watson and various other engines that are now available at a price that we can afford, right? And we can bring that into the process, so your process can become more intelligent, your rules can become more intelligent, and they can actually evolve and become better over time just because of how they're being used. So the potential for, whatever we call it, I believe in the end it's all supporting business transformation. And to support business transformation by just looking at the data sets that are available within an organization would not be the right thing to do, right? So pull in all the stuff that's outside. It's now very readily available. And for those organizations whose customers are that other generation, they have a different lifestyle. They have a different way of how they work and interact. And so if we're not doing that, then we may even miss out on bringing them on as future customers.
I think just one other thought, your comment about AI kind of reminds me, right, back in the day we used to joke that, it's AI until it works, and then you give it another name, right, and it's a market. And I kind of wonder if the same thing is true for BPM, right? It's BPM until there's a market, and then you call it something else, like social media management, or make up another name, because then you have a focused market to go after.
Yeah.
Yep. Who's coming up with that name?
Right.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.